Hello from New Zealand. I'm quilt maker Norma. As a migrant, the idea of home and place is central to my making. We migrated 24 years ago. Here, I farewell and kiss home soil before we left Cape Town, and doing the same when we arrived in Auckland. This is home, the river that flows through our city, and me training for a half marathon. Made after a visit to my childhood home on an African mission station. The idea of home will always have a hold on me, something to do with not having a real family home. My mum was a widow by the time I was 3 and went to nursing school to get an education for work. During her training, I grew up on a farm with my grandparents. When she later became the matron at a mission station, we lived in a hospital house. Both had a lasting effect on me, especially the church bells here in the corners of the quilt. The triangles are home, my physical and spiritual foundation. It reflects the hold home and place can have on your bones, a lament really that we can never return to a childhood home. This was the first time that I really contemplated the idea of home in a quilt, a Christmas challenge. The plan was to make the 12 days of Christmas, but early memories surfaced and it felt wrong to idealize Christmas. As a child, we never celebrated with tinsel or treats. Christmas was a normal working day for Mum, who believed in a living religion of serving people. So in the quilt, only home, 8 pairs and divine light. A primal scream made almost 30 years ago. Where I came from, we protested with our quilts. In the era of resistance art. When I qualified as a journalist in midlife, it had a profound effect on my making. With sentimental notions drilled out and critical thinking drilled in, social issues became my focus. This is the last quilt I made before we migrated, for my son who came to New Zealand a year before we did. It shows all the things that he had left behind. The African sun, soil, animals, swallows at the back door, an entire row of girls, and of course the ancestors. When he decided to stay, we followed. I had no idea what impact migration would have on my making. This is the first quilt that I entered for a quilt symposium in my new country. It was rejected, as was all my other entries for that year. It made me feel a bit homeless in a quilt sense, but it was later selected for a museum show and a quilt door opened for me. When you arrive in a new country, the most frequent question that you must answer is, why did you leave? The poet Wasn't Shy says it best. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. Migration is not for the faint-hearted. The quilt rejections made me realize how much baggage migrants carry into a new life. My baggage quilt was huge, almost life-size, but this too was rejected for a show. The rejections sparked my Welcome series. All have the same statements. Leaving home is a journey without end. Migrants often find themselves unwelcome and spiritually homeless when they discover the place they have journeyed to is not theirs and the one they had left cannot be recovered. The Welcome series finally made it to shows, but the penny also dropped. People voiced their dislike. They called it those brown things. My quilts just did not fit, because New Zealand quilts are colourful things of beauty. When a gallery curator asked me if I had made a New Zealand quilt yet, I knew I still had not found a quilt home. I pondered the colour for expectations, but my themes are not colourful. At the time, coming and going, place and displacement was on my mind, still is. However, I found common ground in the universal patterns that Africa and the Pacific share, with the quilt on the left. As I struggled to find a quilt home, I focused on a solo exhibition. New Zealand galleries are inclusive and welcome textiles. I thank my adopted country for giving me a quilt home to grow. I also found a physical and spiritual home in the silence of our new gully garden. It inspired my next series, and suddenly native plants and angels populated my quilts. It rains a lot in our country. While we restored our gully with natives, something lifted. The joy of working the soil spilled over and the birds started to sing in my quilts. A watershed moment for me in terms of colour, content and goal. Year 60 quilt tells the daily story of a year in my life. It sings with a sense of place and finding a safe home. However, it also made me want to become a well-rounded quilt maker with knowledge of the past. So I dived deep into the making and exploring of traditional quilts. The result was my second exhibition, Walled Garden. In a way, I was building walls around myself with our new walled garden. While working towards my third exhibition, the Syrian refugee crisis happened. I felt a need to call for an understanding of migration and refugees. I had a choice, with time to pack and prepare. Millions do not. They must flee in the night and leave everything behind. They search for shelter, face barriers, scarred for life. A grey series, the colour of shelled concrete rubble and remains. Imagine crossing a vast ocean of dark water with only a glimmer of hope on the other side, all while we stitch. Lately we've added 2 crucial words to our concept of home: lockdown and isolation. Home suddenly became an uncertain certainty. I made this block-a-day quilt during our second lockdown to capture the daily drama and consider the new concept of home. I like to use the quilt language of 2 traditional quilt patterns, the log cabin and the checkered pattern, for their compelling connection to home. The squares are a recurring motif in my work. It's a symbol of home, or what is underfoot. House, home, place, the theme of my last exhibition. The world is in flux, home is a shifting notion. Once a safe place, now tilted on its head. Home has become a workplace and everything in between. It can be a place of interruption, chaos, confinement, isolation, loss and longing. The home journey continues, and I thank you.